fans, from the comfort of our quarantine bases, this is MMA Fight Night live. Finally getting to put use of the word live here. I love it. I'm Nick Peralta. You all may know me as Admin Nick, more prominently featured on the Facebook page. And I'm back causing all the ruckus, though I may be your host for this show. I will be joined by the man who captains the ship like the pirate he is, ladies and gents, founding member of MMA Fight Night Live, Joe Devlin. Joe, how you doing, brother?
Good, man. How you doing, Nick?
So good. Very excited to finally, talk some MMA, get, and we're a week out and there's a lot of excitement going on. There's a lot of topics to talk about. There's a lot to share with the fans. So I'm finally glad we get to be doing this, and shout out to all the guys from MMA Fight Night Live, Sean, Marcos, everybody. There's so many people to thank, but this is going to be fun. What do you think?
I'm like you. I'm geared up, man. It's been a long time since we had some fights on, so I'm glad we got some coming up this weekend. A couple other topics to go through. So all that being said, I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, so we'll start off with 249, and we couldn't have asked for a better fight card. It's completely stacked. Looking at it from bottom to top, there's not a fight on here that I'm not excited to see. We'll start off with some of the prelims. ESPN Plus, again, those are the early preliminary cards. Ryan Superman Spann takes on Smiling Sam Alvey. That fight, to start a card, is insane to me. I love this fight. I love Superman Spann. I followed him in his Legacy Fighting Championship and Legacy Fighting Alliance days. And he's been a light heavyweight doing some work for a good while now. And of course, Smiling Sam Alvey, former middleweight, has moved up to light heavyweight, found some success early, has struggled a little bit. But this is where we're at now. This is a great light heavyweight fight. Gives both guys a chance to really show where they're at and who's going to be the one that progresses forward in this division. You also have Bryce Mitchell, who got away with a twister last year. I think the second one only in UFC history, against Charles Rosa, who's been missing in action a little bit for a while. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right. Yeah, he's been MIA for a minute.
Yeah, he fought against Banny Bermudez last year, but prior to that, he hadn't fought in 2 years. So that's where that's coming from. And then, of course, you got Vicente Luque versus Nico Price. And Nico Price are you excited about Nico Price?
Ooh, that fight. I can't believe it's on the early prelims. Like, if this was like a UFC middle of nowhere card, that would be like co-main event, third from the top. And the fact that this is like the featured prelim on the early prelims, that's crazy. That fight, that's probably top 3 fight on this entire card. And it's just buried in the prelims, but I'm excited for that one.
All 3 of these fights are amazing. The fact that, like you said, these are the early prelims just highlights how incredible this card is. We'll talk about these ones here in passing for the most part. Again, you're looking at 2 light heavyweights, one of which has name value, one of which is on the come up, and a big win here for either man really elevates them up towards the 205 division, because it's kind of scarce right now. You have a few guys that are definitely making noise, but these 2 guys have the potential to really climb quickly if they could perform here well. And then Bryce Mitchell, there's a lot of hype around him, especially in the jiu-jitsu community after that twister that he was able to get. He's fighting Charles Rosa, who was an up-and-comer himself, and having missed as much time as he has, he could potentially come back and make a name for himself again. And then you got Vicente Luque, who was just on the main card, I believe, on a pay-per-view fighting Wonder Boy. It wasn't a bad fight by any means either. So the fact that he's on the early prelims really shocks me. And Nico Price is, that guy's always exciting. That guy's not been in a boring fight at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's why you like him.
Yeah, and and I think it's really a name recognition thing. If you look at some of the fighters on the prelim portion of the card, they definitely have the names. But in terms of performance, when you see like Vicente Luque and Nico Price matched up, I mean, how perfectly put together is that fight? Like, if you had to pick 2 guys from that weight class to go at it and put it on a fun fight, like those 2 guys would be right near the top of the list.
And so, fun fact for Nico Price, just to show you the excitement element that comes with him in literally every fight. He has fought against James Vick, Jeff Neal, who's on the come up, Tim Means, always a fun guy to fight. He's fought guys like Randy Brown. He got that amazing knockout off of his back against him.
Off his back, yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually insane to think about. This is a rematch. These guys have fought before. Vicente Luque and Nico Price fought at UFC Fight Night, Brunson versus Machida in 2017. Vicente Luque won that fight by Dark. So this is a rematch. And that's going to be interesting because Nico Price certainly, I would say, it has improved since that time. Vicente Luque took that win and added that to what was a stellar win streak until he met Wonderboy. So now we're going to see if Luque still is at that top level to where he got that fight with Wonderboy, or if Nico Price has surpassed him, where these guys are at. But again, real quick, I want to highlight this point. Nico Price made his debut at UFC 207, which was in late 2016. Since then, every single fight, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all 10 fights that he's been in the UFC have ended by some form of finish. No decision. This guy has yet to hit the scorecards yet in the UFC.
Yeah, not a boring dude in the least. Not a boring dude.
Not at all. So this should be a fun fight. I think of the 3 fights on this early preliminary card, that's probably the most exciting one. That's probably the reason why it headlines these 3. It headlines the early prelims. Ryan Spann versus Sam Alvey. Ryan Spann is very well rounded. Sam Alvey obviously loves to counter strike. He loves using that lead left hook of his. Let's see. It'll be interesting to see if Ryan Spann decides to utilize his grappling in this fight. And Bryce Mitchell versus Charles Rosa. Rosa, again, another well-rounded guy, but he does prefer the grappling. It seems like he's more wrestler based. And Bryce Mitchell, he's very well-rounded too, but he's shown that he is crafty on the mat. So 2 very, well-matched fights below this amazing Luque Price rematch. So I'm excited for that. We'll move on to the preliminaries on ESPN. Remember that, fight fans, this will be televised on ESPN before the pay-per-view starts. And the first fight on the preliminary portion, television portion, ESPN, Uriah Primetime Hall versus Ronaldo Jacare Souza. And the fact that he is so low on this card almost is disrespectful. But again, highlights just how stacked this card is. Now, Uriah Hall, the Ultimate Fighter runner-up to Kelvin Gastelum, he's actually not doing too bad. He's on a 2-fight win streak, knocked out Bevon Lewis at UFC 232 in late 2018, but only fought once last year against Antonio Carlos Jr., garnering a split decision victory. So he's not been competing that actively as of late, but here he is 6 months later. He's going to have another fight. Not 6 months, 10 months later, sorry. It's interesting to see that he hasn't competed that often, as found my best really in the last few years, but 2 or 3 years ago was when he really kind of hit a bad skid. But he's 3-1 in his last 4. What do you think his chances are against a high level caliber fighter like Jacare?
It's so tricky with Uriah Hall because everything with him is hot and cold. So, he can come out one fight, look phenomenal, striking solid, moving forward, putting together combinations. And then you see him come out a fight later and he's, gun shy and he's on his back foot and he's not responding well. And, against a guy like Jacare, Jacare obviously on the tail end of his career looking for, another win to kind of get him back into the potential title picture, I guess you can call it. He really needs this win. And I'm thinking that the experience of someone like Jacare is going to make the difference in the fight. As much as I'd like to see Uriah Hall continue to make steps to kind of build himself up, I got a feeling that Jacare is able to pull this out either by decision or by submission. But I'd honestly be just as happy to see Hall win. But if you're asking me where my money would be, I'd say Jacare, all things standing.
Yeah, Jacare is he's had some hardships in the last year. He's lost 2 in a row, both by decision though, to up and comers like Jan Blachowicz. Oh, that was a light heavyweight fight. He decided to try his hand at 205, and then before that, lost to middleweight contender Jack Hermanson. So this is a return to middleweight. I think he believes that the guys at 205 are just a little too big. And so it'll be interesting to see how he does. This is the kind of fight that Jacare should return to, just to show us where he's at middleweight. Uriah Hall is certainly one of those guys who's always kind of leveled out there in the middle of the pack, there in the top 15, and he needs a big win to really elevate him. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes from here if he does win. But a win here would be absolutely huge for sure. In the next fight on the card, Carla Esparza, Michelle Karate Hottie Waterson. I like this fight. This is definitely a fight where both women, have found mixed match success. Michelle Waterson, I believe, coming off that Joanna and Jacek fight, if I remember correctly. She lost by decision. And it was a tough fight for her. She definitely performed admirably, but it was a fight where Joanna still showed that she is top tier, one of the top tier side of that top three, I would say. She's lost to the likes of Rose Namajunas, Joanna. Those are not names that you can hang your hat on being in there with them and having competed and gotten to those fights. And so otherwise, she's won her last three prior to that Joanna loss and generally competes very well. But Carlos Esparza is a very good grappler, very good wrestler, has definitely dealt with trouble on the feet in her last few fights, especially in the Claudia Gadelha one. I felt that split decision loss to her was very close. I didn't think that she should have lost that one. But she's won 2 in a row. She beat Alexa Grasso by majority decision. It was a very close fight, but it was an exciting one in Mexico City that garnered fight of the night. She won it also against newcomer Verna Jandiroba. I hope I didn't mess that up too much.
No idea.
But she's always been there in the top 10. Both of these women have been. So it's a very good fight name wise. Stylistically, I find it interesting because Michelle Waterson obviously should look to keep this standing, and Carlos Esparza should obviously look to take this down. So a very fun striker versus grappler matchup. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. But, I've actually been impressed by Esparza's gains in the striking department in her last couple of fights, because she was always 100% grappler. And, from the early days of strawweight going through the tough house and winning the championship, she kind of leaned on that wrestling experience. And, she obviously, suffered that bad loss to Joanna. And, she's kind of had ups and downs since then. But I'd say since the Gadelha fight and moving forward, I actually think her striking has improved greatly. I did pick her in that fight against Gadelha. I thought she won that fight. And obviously both Waterson and Esparza being kind of near the top of the heap at 115 and how deep that weight class is, both of them are fighting pretty much nothing but, champs, top 5 type opponents. So it's not, to me, it doesn't seem like a bad omen that, that both have kind of had their ups and downs. But to me, this is a bit of a litmus test because, I would say both are probably on the downside of their career. If either wants to make a legitimate run at another championship, I think that they got to get past this test first. My gut tells me whoever wins this fight, if they can put together maybe another win behind it, it can get them a title shot. And if whoever loses this fight, I think it's going to be pretty tough to have them kind of get back to the top of the mountain. It might be a little too far at this point.
Agreed. Yeah, and again, I also very much agree that it was a tough fight, but I thought it was clear cut enough for Esparza to have won that Gadelha fight. I hope they rematch at some point. Yeah. Next fight, heavyweight division, Alexei Olynyk. One of the very few submission heavyweights that we have against probably the best submission heavyweight that there's ever been, Fabricio Verdum, arguably so. Him or Big Nog, and Fabricio Verdum coming off of that suspension from USADA. Again, controversially so, was able to get some time nixed off, and here he is. What do you think of this fight?
This one's really curious. I've never been sold on Olynyk only because he's 100% strictly a grappler in a heavyweight division where you got to fight guys that throw hands, and get hit hard, and Fabricio, his stand-up has improved so much over the last, 5 or so years. I think under Rafael Cordero, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, King's MMA.
King's MMA. I know that he's been on the shelf for a little while, and I know he's up there in age. I believe he's 41, 42, 41.
Yes. Yep.
But, at the end of the day, I think his skill set is just far superior to Olynyk. And if he keeps this on the feet, as I imagine he will, he should be able to pick Olynyk apart. And on the ground, as great as a grappler as Olynyk is, I don't think Verdun is going to be caught by any of Olynyk's trickery. I think that he's too sophisticated a black belt to get caught in some of these moves, some of these scarf holds, some of these neck cranks, all these little funky submissions that Olynyk has. I just don't see Verdun falling prey to any of them. So I think Verdun takes this fight.
Yeah, agreed. Now, Donald Cowboy Cerrone making his return after his fight with Conor McGregor. If you're a Cowboy fan, that one sure stung, I'm sure. He will be rematching former lightweight champion Anthony Pettis. Now, these two guys fought way back in the day. I want to say 2014. Let me look that up just to make sure.
2014, maybe 2013.
Maybe. I know it was a UFC on Fox card featuring Demetrius Johnson. That's literally all I remember. 2013. Yeah, you got me. Yeah. And of course, Anthony Pettis won that fight with a kick to the body. One of his more, prolific wins at lightweight, especially back then, that eventually got him to the title shot against Benson Henderson. Now, of course, it's been 7 years. Both of these guys are in, have traversed the lightweight and welterweight division, and for Pettis, even the featherweight division. There's been a lot of wear and tear for both of these guys, and you could argue that both of these guys are close to maybe their end days here in MMA, but it makes for a compelling rematch because of that. It is at welterweight. This will be competed at 170, so neither of these guys will have to cut too much weight. And I believe that Cerrone has much more of a chance in this fight than he did their first time around when Pettis was certainly on his surge. Pettis has had the interval wins and losses here. He's actually coming off two losses, one to Carlos Ferreira, and before that, Nate Diaz. He did have that upset victory over Wonderboy last year, at the beginning of last year, but that was certainly in a fight where he was losing the majority of it before coming back with a big knockout. Yeah. So now we have Cerrone here, who's lost 3 in a row, but to 3 of the best guys at lightweight, and I mean the best short of Khabib. You got Justin Gaethje and Tony Ferguson, who are fighting at the top of this card, and Conor McGregor. So they're not losses that you can, hang a hat on too long for, but they are losses, and they're losses in which he was finishing all of them. So what do you think of this one?
Yeah, this one I'm really kind of stuck with. My gut tells me that Cerrone is going to pull it off. The one thing that always troubles me about Pettis, he always gets injured in all of his fights. And I don't know if you've realized that, but, in almost every fight now, you see him in the corner in between rounds. And, how often has he suffered broken hands? I think he had injured ribs once or twice. And I don't know. I just get the feeling that the wear and tear is showing on Anthony Pettis a lot more than it is Donald Cerrone. And I know Donald's got coming off of all the losses, but like you said, those are against top tier elite guys. I think that even at a bit of an older age, I do like the fact that Cerrone is still a little bit more active. I like the fact that he's getting in a little more fight time. And I feel like whenever Pettis fights, he's either injured in the fight or injured after, and then it kind of delays his return. So I'll be honest, I'm never quite sure what to think of a Pettis fight now. But with Cerrone, the story with him has always been the same. If he's leading the action and he's walking forward, the opponent's in trouble, right? And you've seen it in his big wins, and you see it in his losses. He's always trailing. And so to me, this whole fight is going to be decided by who dictates the pace of the fight and who controls the center of the octagon. My gut tells me it'll be Cerrone, but this is a bit of a pick 'em for me.
Yeah, I agree. It's a fun fight. I think because of where they're both at, that's what makes it a fun fight. It's at 170, so both of these guys will probably be in solid shape, not having had to cut too much weight. So, and it'll really show us which one's going to last longer here in the UFC. Because, like I said, I feel like both of these guys are on the downswing, and at any moment, either these guys could retire, and you could go, yeah, makes sense. So we'll see what happens. It headlines the ESPN preliminary card, and with that, we move on to the main card. Now, we'll try and keep these ones short, but I do find it interesting that Greg Hardy will start us off here on the pay-per-view portion of the card. Greg Hardy will take on Yorgan de Castro, newcomer here in the UFC. Now, Greg Hardy, of course, has had quite the interesting run. And you want to talk about active. This guy is pretty active. He's fought, I want to say 6 or 7 times. Let me make sure I get that right. But yes, since making his UFC debut officially in the UFC, not just the Contender Series, he's fought 5 times. He fought 5 times in 2019. That ties the record for most in a calendar year for a UFC fighter. He went 2-2 and won no contest. The no contest obviously being a victory that was a decision initially, but controversially so, he used an inhaler in between rounds. That was kind of funny. But this last loss of his, he took on Alexander Volkov on short notice, and props to him, man, for a guy who was only at the time 5-1 and 1 no contest to go in there against an experienced guy like Volkov, former Bellator champion. Dude's been around, and he went in there and at least tried to see where he was at. It's one of those fights where you got to see where you're at. Can you take on the cream of the crop yet? We saw that that's not the case. There's still a lot of growth for him to be had, but that's what this matchup really services. What do you think of Greg Hardy, just overall so far in the UFC?
Yeah, I mean, he obviously got a late start to the sport. I will give him credit for kind of taking on as many fights as he can. We obviously saw like the CM Punk situation where he'd been training jiu-jitsu for a while. And late in his, athletic career, we'll call it, he decided to take a fight and it didn't go his way. And he kind of, hung it on the shelf for a little while. The one thing you could say with Greg Hardy is that he's always willing to fight and he's willing to kind of learn from his mistakes. And he seems to want to get back in there as soon as he's out. So, I mean, in terms of like the dedication, I mean, that's there and that's great. Obviously he's had some real oddball fights, the illegal knee when the opponent was down, the inhaler. I mean, there's always something with all of his fights. Outside of Volkov, I would say that this is probably his next toughest fight. De Castro, correct me if I'm wrong, he's coming off of a knockout win, or am I thinking about somebody else?
It's hard to forget a guy like named De Castro. He is undefeated at 6-0 with 5 knockouts.
5 knockouts.
Trains. Oh man, weighs heavy. Has weighed in as heavy as 263 before. And yes, he knocked out Justin Tafa at UFC 243 last year, and is winner of the Contender Series, just like Greg Hardy. So that's where I remember the name.
Yeah,
but yeah, man, great record, great solid finishes, all knockouts via punch. So he's a striker. So you got a guy who's probably going to be willing to bang in there with Greg Hardy, and we'll see. That's where I remember him. He had an amazing lead counter hook knockout as somebody was charging in on him, and he just walked away like that was like he looked like Mark Hunt. It was smooth. It was an incredible knockout. It was one of my favorites on that card. I'm remembering him now. Yeah. That's an interesting opponent. He's not that big for a heavyweight, but obviously heavy-handed. So it's going to be interesting to see what approach Greg Hardy takes for this fight. I am excited for this one. Jeremy Stephens versus Calvin Kattar. That is the next, or Kattar. Let's hope I got one of those right.
It's Kattar. It's Kattar.
That's a fun fight. Yeah. Calvin Kattar is a fun up and coming featherweight. Jeremy Stephens, all that could be said is all you have to do is just look at how the man fights. He fights how he fights. He's never changed. He's often adapted his striking style to his opponents, but otherwise he is go, go, go. He's always in there ready to bang. And Kattar is going to have his hands full with this one. What do you think? What do you like about this fight?
It's funny. When I look at Kattar, he reminds me a lot of Jeremy Stephens. Real heavy-handed, really good defensive wrestling, can turn it on when he wants to, but for the most part, he likes to stand and bang, but obviously on the mat, no slouch. Kattar had that tough loss to Zabit, I think the last time out when they had that card in Moscow, if I'm not mistaken. But he was in it the whole time. And in the third round, he started to turn it up on Zabit. I really think that you see a lot of up-and-comers in all different weight classes, and they always need that win against a named opponent to kind of get them through to that next level. I think he's going to take out Jeremy Stephens in this fight, and I think he's going to kind of, I know, and I think he's going to make his name off of it. Yeah, no, I think he's going to take out Stephens.
I like it. Bold call. And man, the most exciting fight from, a Just Bleed perspective, Francis Ngannou versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Oh man, that is, someone's going night-night. I feel someone's taking a sleep apnea filled night-night after this one. One can only hope, really. That's the kind of matchup we're looking at. Two of the most heavy-handed guys at heavyweight who are legitimate strikers. They have incredible striking ability. Jairzinho, a former kickboxer. Francis has shown his ability to really elevate his striking game more and more each time he competes. He shows that he can counter-strike on back. He's got great uppercuts. He's got great clinch work, dirty boxing. He's always working on something, it seems, especially if you follow him on social media. It's always interesting to see how he loves highlighting the work and the improvements he's making and the steps he's doing to make that happen. So I find this fight incredibly interesting. I do favor Francis, but what do you got?
Yeah, I'm thinking Francis too. Everyone thinks about, or everyone remembers the Jairzinho knockout of Alistair Overeem and just tearing his whole face apart on that last punch. But, Overeem was winning that entire fight. And, he just kind of got a little too lackadaisical at the end. He got caught with a big right. I really still think that Francis is the future of the heavyweight division in the UFC. I do think that he will in time overtake DC, assuming he's still there, or Stipe and take that belt. I think he finishes Jairzinho in the first. Jairzinho seems very open to standing and trading with Francis, but I think that's going to end about 30, 45 seconds into the fight when he feels the power. And I see Francis closing it out in the first couple of minutes.
I get giddy just thinking about that one. Just the level of violence we'll probably see in that one.
Yeah.
Not so much unlike the main event, which we'll get to in a moment, but we got one more fight to talk about. The one I'm probably most excited behind the heavyweight fight. And don't get me wrong, I'm excited about the main event because the main event is great, but I absolutely love this bantamweight title fight. I know a lot of people have questioned whether or not Dominick Cruz has earned this rematch, deserves this rematch. And there's arguments on both sides. You could argue that he doesn't deserve this and that some other fighters should have. Either Aljamain Sterling, who said already that he wouldn't have taken if he was offered it due to the pandemic, and Petr Yan, who can't get out of Russia. So they wanted to add some more flair to this card, and putting Henry Cejudo definitely on this card definitely does that. And if Dominick Cruz, I don't see a problem with it from that point of view. If any of the other two guys that I just mentioned were available, they should have gotten it first. The fact that Jose Aldo was going to get this title shot, I didn't even agree with that. So I don't have a problem with him not having gotten that title shot, nor should he get it after this Dominick Cruz one. However, Dominick Cruz versus Jose. But like I said, I don't think Jose Aldo, whether you agree with the decision that he won or lost against Marlon Moraes, he lost. On paper, he lost. That's what happens. And we shouldn't treat that like he didn't for the sake of just because of his name value. And trust me, it's got great name value. And I hope we see him fight again at bantamweight because he looked great. I think he could potentially make a decent rise at bantamweight, but he shouldn't be rushed to a title shot just based off his name. Now, I love this fight between Henry Cejudo and Dominick Cruz. I have actually been working from here at home on Dominick Cruz's footwork regimen that he put up on his social media, and I've had a blast doing it. And man, do you have to have cardio just to do what he does on the feet? And you have to have really good strength in your legs. You have to have real good conditioning in your thighs, your calves. It's amazing that he's been able to keep that kind of style going for the majority of his career and utilize it as successfully as he has. I think that he's going to give Henry Cejudo a lot of problems on the feet should he be able to keep it standing. And of course, Cruz is one of the hardest guys to take down. I think that he gives Cejudo enough problems to take it to a decision. Does he win that decision? Who knows? Cejudo has made vast improvements on his striking himself. He's one of the best wrestlers in any division that he's in. It's going to be a fun fight. What do you think?
Yeah, I have a hard time seeing either guy stopping the other. They're both ultra tough dudes. You mentioned about Dominick Cruz and the footwork and the toll it takes out of you, and anyone who's done any sort of stand up and they've been bouncing on their toes and having to switch stance all the time and change position, drop down to stuff a takedown or drop down for a single leg or double leg of their own. It's an exhausting pace. And, the one thing that I am somewhat concerned about is being that he's been out of action for 3.5 years now and really is taking this fight on short notice, unless he knew about this maybe 2 months ago as a backup and never really said anything. My only concern is, Henry's obviously elite in terms of his athleticism, in terms of his cardio. He's got wrestling for days. And I know that Dominick is a real tough guy to take down. I think that all the wars that Dominick had with Uriah Faber really prepare him well for a guy like Cejudo that, in my opinion, has a similar-ish game, similar-ish build. I'm thinking Cejudo here, but I'm never one to count Cruz out. We saw when he came back against Mizugaki. We saw when he came back against Dillashaw. He still got it. 3.5 years later, does he still have it against a two-weight class champ? We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. That's a great fight. I'm excited for it. And now we go on to the main event. Now, is it Ferguson Khabib? No, unfortunately not. It's going to continue to elude us for as long as it does. We'll see if we ever see it. Who knows? But if you look at this fight, despite the disappointment, this is an amazing fight. Ferguson versus Gaethje, two of the biggest bangers in the lightweight division, two of the most talented guys in the lightweight division. Gaethje being an incredible wrestler who doesn't utilize the skills as much as he should because he is an insanely talented striker as well and loves getting in there and putting it to guys and will take the shot to give the shot. And Ferguson is the same way, however, much more skilled on the ground in terms of submissions and jiu-jitsu and scrambling. It's going to be so fun to see anywhere this fight is, either guy could find themselves having an advantage, whether it's on the feet, on the mat. If you have Ferguson off his back, he's incredibly dangerous. Gaethje is incredibly great at creating scrambles that allow for either of these guys to maybe find some type of offensive positioning that could easily lead to the end of the fight. I love this fight. This is one of the better main events that you could ever make, hands down. The fact that it's for the interim lightweight championship, if there was ever going to be one, this one kind of makes sense. In terms of the timing of it, I feel like it's only because of the fact that Khabib won't be competing until at least September due to Ramadan and, this whole epidemic. Who knows when Russia will allow its citizens to leave the country again. Hopefully we're coming out the tail end of this thing in regards to the coronavirus pandemic. But no matter how you look at it, this is an insanely fun fight. There's no way this fight's not fun, not entertaining, and won't deliver. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of like you. It's a bummer we can't see Khabib versus Tony. Apparently we just can't have nice things. But all things being considered, if you have to remove Khabib out of the equation, Justin is obviously the next guy in line. And when you look at the changes he's made to his game since picking up those back-to-back losses to Poirier and Alvarez, who, are elite of the elite, he's put together 3 strong wins. He's dialed back the aggression. He's getting a little more, a little less eager on the feet. And what makes this matchup so interesting to me is that Tony Ferguson's first round is usually the worst round of his fight. And, there's plenty of examples of that where he's been rocked early or he's been hit a lot more often early. And then as the fight goes on,
Lando Venata fight
got put on Queer Street. So, there was that fight. Even Cerrone in the first round had success against him. Josh Thompson, if I remember correctly, in the first round had some success against him. So when you think about a guy like Gaethje, who does his best work early, and a guy like Ferguson, who probably does his, we'll say worst work. It's not bad, but he seems to get hit more often early. That kind of makes for an interesting matchup. In my opinion, the only way Justin wins this fight is first or second round by TKO or KO. If it goes to a decision, it's going to be Ferguson. If it's a sub, it's going to be Ferguson. I personally like Ferguson in this fight. I think that he'll get through those first 2 rounds and then from there turn up the pace and start picking apart Gaethje. But Gaethje, as tough as he is, this could easily go to a decision.
Yeah, of all of his fights since 2011 in the UFC, 7 of them have ended in the second or third rounds. Specifically those 2. So It shows that, it takes him a minute to get started. He's got a couple first round finishes in there as well, but he hasn't had one in a while. And it kind of highlights that. He definitely likes to get going as the fight progresses. So that's UFC 249, an incredible fight card. I mean, we probably didn't even mean to talk about it as much as we did, but almost every single fight on this card has something fun for every type of fan that there is out there. There's something about this card that's definitely special. It could end up being event of the year. It has the name value to already suggest as much. I'm very excited for this fight. There is so much about it that you could look at and say, oh, I love that matchup. I love this matchup. It's a great card. And despite it being in an empty arena where there's no audience, I'm sure all of us watching from home are going to be on the edge of our seats with almost every single matchup. So I'm very excited for this one. It's a great card. We got a couple more topics here before we get up out of here. There's Dana White did a Reddit Q&A not too long ago. That was very interesting. I had a lot of fun watching, him interact with the fans. It's very, say what you will about Dana. When he interacts with the fans, it's obvious that he loves just enjoying that back and forth, getting to have that fun in interacting one-on-one or in a group setting. And for this, it just seemed like he was having fun as well, throwing emojis around, throwing a lot of shit talking around. It was fun to watch. So, but on this Reddit, he talked about his desire to now make Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor too. It seems like he's been demoralized once again from making Tony Ferguson versus Khabib happen. Which you can't fault him at this point. Any promoter would be pulling whatever hair they have left. He's out of it, so he's just throwing any kind of tantrum, I'm sure, backstage in spite of not having made this fight over and over and over again, despite the many tries. I can see why he would want to make Khabib and McGregor too. It's a very, very sellable fight. The first fight, the headline, the biggest pay-per-view they've ever done. I can see where the appeal is for him. But what do you think of this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, what he was saying, and you kind of already mentioned, is that he had reservations about trying to book Tony and Khabib again. It's obviously the obvious fight to make at lightweight. It's the two best lightweights potentially in history, depending on your viewpoint. And this could really decide it, but he's been kind of snake bitten by it a couple times now, and he seems a little hesitant to pull the trigger again. From a promotional standpoint, obviously Conor Khabib 2 makes a lot of sense. It was the biggest selling pay-per-view in UFC history. Obviously there's plenty of bad blood. But the whole idea of Conor cutting the line in a division that's just so stacked is a little tough to get over. He had the win over Cowboy, and albeit he looked fantastic in the 40 some odd seconds it went. But at the same time, you've got the Tonys and the Gaethjes and the Poiriers and, plenty of other matchups out there. I'd personally be surprised if they made that fight happen. I do think that the winner of Tony and Justin will get that fight against Khabib probably September, October. I think that Dana can do just about whatever he wants with Conor and make a big card out of it. So whether that be a Diaz trilogy, whether that be a Masvidal fight, I think he has a lot of options with Conor. I'd like to remove him from the title picture until he gets a win or two under his belt, other than the Cowboy fight, before trying to put him up there again. But we'll see what Dana does with that one.
My thoughts on it are this: is that I don't believe Conor should be in the title picture, just like you. And here's why: I think you risk really dimming out any kind of surging light that McGregor has. His star power is probably not as big as it was, say, 3 or 4 years ago. You put him in a fight in a rematch against Khabib, a fight he lost, I felt decidingly. And you risk him losing again. That's 3 times in the last couple years, including the Mayweather fight. Did he look great against Cowboy? For sure. And I'm sure it did well on pay-per-view. And again, there are other matchups to which you can put and continue utilizing that star power while allowing him to continue improving, if that's something that Conor himself is actually doing. You wonder if maybe that's the reason he wants the rematch so bad. He wants to get in there as soon as possible. Maybe the sooner the better in his eyes. Maybe that's why Conor has that desire for that rematch. But I would say that, you could utilize his star power more effectively if he were to take on rematches like Poirier or guys like Gaethje. Say Gaethje wins this interim title fight against Ferguson, which is very, very viable. It could happen. That kind of title fight for an interim title makes sense. I could get with that. And then you have an undisputed fight between Khabib and McGregor that could easily sell well. No matter how you look at it, any fight with McGregor sells well, including that rematch with Khabib, but doesn't need to be made now. I think that there's too much going on at lightweight to justify it at the moment.
Yeah. And I'll kind of add on to that, and I'll kind of transition that to the next topic, because to me, they're kind of tied together. Agreed with you. And I also think that stylistically, Khabib is always going to pose such a horrendous matchup for Conor just based on their skill set. Now, talking about the UFC again, they were discussing changing plans for Jorge Masvidal. The plan was to have him fight Kamaru Usman. It had been rumored to be happening in July, I believe, what would have been International Fight Week. Who knows what it'll be now? And just earlier last week, the UFC came out and they kind of said, well, now they're looking at different options for Jorge Masvidal. In my opinion, you have a guy like Masvidal and putting him up against just a monster of a wrestler like Kamaru Usman's a real tough task. And Masvidal's star power is at an all-time high coming off of some of the wins he's had lately. I kind of liken it to the Conor McGregor-Khabib matchup. In my opinion, I'd like to see Masvidal-McGregor. Right? To me, that would be a phenomenal striking matchup. They both get to play to their strengths. And I think that serves as a better star-making fight for either man, because if Masvidal beats McGregor, then he gets put into the stratosphere. If McGregor beats Masvidal, you say that he just beat the number one contender, if you want to call him that, and they can go ahead and they can just duke it out with if McGregor beats him, then you can say, okay, then you can drop down to 55 and fight Khabib. If Masvidal beats McGregor, sure, have him fight Usman at that point, maybe. But I think to throw Masvidal to Usman now stylistically is a real tough matchup, and you don't want to kill Masvidal's star power, which has been on the rise for the last, almost 2 years now.
And here's another thing about Masvidal. And like you said, I agree very much that him fighting Usman maybe isn't the right time for that fight. However, his star power is as high as it's been ever, but it could get higher. Say he fought McGregor and he won that fight, it would be higher for sure. And he would have the biggest name going at the present time in the UFC if he won that fight. And he could fight for the welterweight belt after that, and it would be one of the biggest welterweight title fights ever, probably ever. From a selling point, it could definitely do the numbers GSP used to do, and welterweight would probably never be as exciting as that potential matchup, especially with how Usman has competed as of late. He's been in some fun fights, and I think he presents I think as a champion, he presents a very fun fight for anybody that he fights in the top of the division. Colby Covington, that fight was great. If he were to fight Woodley again, I feel like the rematch would be much more exciting than the first matchup was, because I don't think we saw the best Tyron Woodley. If he fights Masvidal, I think we see a very exciting fight there, because I think Usman's the kind of guy to really work some of his boxing in there before feeling the need to utilize his wrestling, which I don't think would be outside of excitement either, because Masvidal's the kind of guy that scrambles. He uses his jiu-jitsu well. He makes grappling fun to watch when you're watching him fight. I think that no matter what you do with Masvidal, it's an exciting fight, and and it's exciting for the fans, it's exciting for the welterweight division. But there's absolutely nothing more high level excitement than Masvidal versus McGregor. It'd be the best fight to make for sure. And I think the biggest thing too for Jorge is, and this is a rumor, because Colby Covington kind of said it weeks ago, where he said Jorge was going to kind of price himself out. You wonder if that's what happened here. If he made himself too expensive for this title fight with Kamaru Usman. Who knows? It's a rumor at this point. We don't know what the story is. All we know is Dana is talking about not putting him against Usman, and I wonder why that is. There's no actual reason for it. But if Dana White isn't thinking about giving Jorge to Usman, then what is he going to do with him? What are the other options other than McGregor? And I don't see many of them other than the Colby fight. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. He's at the top now, and he obviously took care of Nate Diaz pretty easily. They created the BMF belt just for the guy. They're really working on building his star power. To me, I thought even before these rumors of McGregor cutting the line at lightweight potentially, and even before the rumors of Usman fighting Masvidal, I thought when Conor beat Cowboy, the next logical fight for him would be Masvidal. I think that you have two primarily striking specialists, to kind of go back on Masvidal a little bit. And I know you talked about Usman and how he can mix up the boxing and the wrestling. The one thing about Masvidal is that in past, when he's fought primarily grapplers, he's played a little much to their strengths. He's a little too willing to go on the mat because he is confident in his submission defense and he's in his own wrestling. but I prefer him against strikers because when he's on his feet without the fear of takedowns, he's very loose. He's almost like a McGregor in the way that he just, throws together real nice combinations, mixes up the hands and the feet. So like you, this is really a no-brainer if you ask me. Masvidal is going to go for it. The real question is McGregor going to go for it? It'll be his call at the end of the day. If Dana was to pitch to McGregor that if you fight Masvidal at 70, we'll get you in against Khabib next, maybe that'll work. But in my opinion, that's the fight that needs to be made. I think it's a perfect opportunity for both guys, and I think it's a no-brainer in terms of pay-per-view sales.
Definitely. There's nothing you can't do with Masvidal and it won't be exciting, but there is a way to maybe possibly prolong the stardom that he's carrying right now. Same with McGregor, as we were talking about. We'll finalize this off with one last topic. We were very interested in seeing what Israel Adesanya does next. Obviously, Paulo Costa should be next, but the rivalry with him and John Jones continues to get eerily more exciting as time goes on. Despite the controversies that John himself continues to find himself in, and despite that, actually, I think it enhances the rivalry between the two.
Yeah, it's real interesting. These two have been going back and forth now for at least a couple of months. Izzy kind of would poke fun at John, for the picograms and for obviously, all the altercations with police and the courts. Up until the Reyes fight, I thought that the proposition of a Jones-Izzy fight was a little crazy. Izzy is not a large middleweight when you look at him size-wise. Jones is obviously a pretty big light heavyweight. But when you look at the trouble Jones has had in his last couple of fights, you remove the Anthony Smith fight, but you look at the Dominick Reyes and Thiago Santos fight, he won both of those by the skin of his teeth, and they were, 95% striking fights. I looked up the reach advantage that Jones would have on Adesanya because both guys like to utilize their length when they're at their best. And Jones, for as long of a reach he has, is only about 3.5 or 4 inches longer than Adesanya. And Jones, in my opinion, is kind of coming to the close of his reign at light heavyweight. He's had a couple close calls now in his last few fights. I really think that in the next 2 to 3 fights, he's going to end up dropping that belt. And Adesanya just keeps getting better every time we see him. He had that real war with Gastelum, but if you take that away, I mean, he's been as solid as you can get. I'd really be curious to see what Adesanya could do against Jones at 205 if he was able to put on the muscle. I know it's a little too early to say now. He's got a line of people he's got to fight at middleweight, but I really think that would be a competitive fight, a fight he could potentially win if he was able to keep it standing. So we'll see how both of these guys' careers kind of progress and if there is an opportunity for both of them to meet at light heavyweight in the future. But that's one to kind of keep on your calendar, a year or 2 years from now. I think that there would be enough push behind or enough push from the UFC to get both men on board with that. And I think at this point, both men would take that fight as well. Jones seems increasingly uninterested in much of the competition at light heavyweight, even though they're really creeping up on him. He seems to be looking for a big name, and Adesanya, who's already a superstar in his own right, really has everything to gain from fighting Jones. If he fights him and he beats him, he's in that GOAT debate. And if he fights him and he loses, well, he went up a weight class and he fought arguably the best fighter on planet Earth. So there's no harm in that loss.
Yeah, I don't feel like when BJ Penn moved up to fight George St. Pierre for the welterweight belt and lost it, it really hurt his, stock too much,
Right.
So I think Izzy has a lot more to gain here taking that fight, while Jones has a lot more to lose. However, I think it's a high-profile fight that could maybe excite him. He's done really well in his fight with actual rivals. You know what I mean? When he rematched Gustafsson, that was a fight that everybody wanted to see him in, and he came back and absolutely throttled him in the rematch. Both fights against Daniel Cormier, he competed very well, albeit was shown to be mortal in both of those fights. Cormier performed really well in both of those fights as well, but he was able to garner a great finish in the second one and won the fight by decision, and he was able to actually modify his game as that first fight went on, and eventually took the decision based on the later rounds. So I find that there's a lot to be had for both guys, but it will be interesting to see which steps Jones takes. And really, hopefully, we've seen the last of his troubles, but who knows with him, Yeah. Here's hoping. I hope he stops running into trouble. There's a lot of people that just have given up on Jones in that regard. Like something's going to happen with him, and eventually it'll get too big to where he can't get away from it. And hopefully we never see that, because despite that, he is actually a very fun, prominent aspect of the sport that we watch because of how he competes so well inside of the octagon. Yet outside of it, he is an enigma that really is in his own way most of the time. So, we haven't seen him compete that often in the last few years, and that's because of the trouble that he's been in. So, we'll see where he goes from here. With Izzy, obviously, he's got his future path kind of lined up with middleweight contenders, as you said. With Jones, it's still up in the air right now. We don't know if he's going to fight Jan Blachowicz next or Dominick Reyes next, or what his decision will be to do. But no matter how you put it, there's always going to be, as long as Israel is the champion, that rivalry and that potential matchup is always going to be there. So we'll end off on that note. It's been a long one, but I definitely have had a blast doing this, Joe. This is going to be fun. Hopefully we get back into this, and as we go along, fight fans will definitely try to compact this show a little better. But getting to all these topics, getting to talk MMA for the first time in, it seems like months, definitely weeks, several weeks. We can't wait for UFC 249 to go down this Saturday, May 9th, UFC 249. I'm excited. I know you're excited. Joe, how excited are you, bro?
I'm at like a 9, man. It's been about 2 months now, and the fact that you're not coming back into like a UFC Brasilia, you're coming back into like a packed pay-per-view card. I mean, that's pretty nice. So, like Nick was mentioning, we're going to look at doing this on a weekly basis. We'll obviously compact a little bit. You do first run, see how it goes. We're going to get better from here on out. But thanks everyone for tuning in. Nick, any final words from you?
Yeah, we're definitely looking to add some other aspects to the show, but we definitely love to hear from you fans too. Let's see if you guys have anything for us you'd love to hear us talk about, add on to the show. Maybe we'll definitely talk about it, toy with it. Like Joe said, there's always some room for improvement, and we'll be looking to do that each and every single time we do another show. So we appreciate you guys. Keep following the page. Make sure, if you don't already, check us out on Facebook as well, and we'll continue to bring you all the content that you guys love and deserve. So again, this Saturday, May 9th, UFC 249, we will return next week for another live show, and we will definitely be reviewing the next card, as well as what happened at UFC 249. Can't wait. Joe?
Peace out.
Peace out.